Good afternoon. Welcome to the September Spark session, in which we delve into not just making your point, but making it persuasive. For those of you who are first time with a Spark session, let me introduce Spark Freedom. We're a nonprofit communications advising organization devoted to helping the Liberty Movement recapture the hearts of the most important people, our neighbors. Now, if you know us already, you already know today's speaker, Nicole Williams. She's the founder and president of Spark Freedom. She's one of our facilitators and advisors, and in case you want the personal side of things, she's a homesteader in rural Tennessee. Before we jump right into this webinar, let me introduce a couple of things. If you would like to ask questions, at the bottom of your screen is a little icon saying Q&A. Please type your questions there, and toward the end of this session, we'll ask Nicole to answer them. I'd also like to mention that next month, the Spark session is one of your favorites, Ask the Experts. In that, you send questions to Nicole at sparkfreedom.org. She finds an expert to answer your very question, and we air the answers and the questions on October 27 at noon Eastern Time at the October Ask the Expert Spark session. But that's not what we're here for today. Nicole, why are we talking about telling versus selling?
Well, Lonnie, oddly enough, that reminds me of a video. I found this one on YouTube a couple days ago and thought it illustrated the why fairly well. So we'll hit play. Hopefully it's loud enough for everybody to hear.
Well, in this kitchen, we have cabinets in many different colors, granite countertops, and we also include stainless steel appliances.
Oh, that's great. So does the builder down the street.
And isn't this kitchen something? My builder puts in a microwave, refrigerator, and oven too.
Oh, that's great. So does the builder down the street.
There is two-tone paint and many types of tile you can choose from for the floors.
Oh, that's great. So does the builder down the street.
So what's it going to take to get you to buy today, Mr. Prospect?
Well, we can start by you asking me what's important to me. How about that?
Oh, okay. What's important to you in the kitchen, Mr. Prospect? Is the kitchen even important?
No, I don't cook and don't have a wife who cooks either. The garage is the most important thing to me.
Well then, tell me what you like to use your garage for.
That's better. You need to ask me questions to know what's important to me. Not do all the talking.
I hear you loud and clear. I was showing and telling, and it should be you who is doing the telling. Selling 101. Thanks for reminding me, Mr. Prospect. Now, how about that check?
So that's a good example of
when we're talking about something that's very important to us and might not be framing it in a way that's important to the person we're talking to. And I know it's simplistic and corny, but that's why we're here today. In fact, a few weeks ago, we were at a work session and we were working as a group to grapple with which story is the best story to tell so that we can test a message that we were developing for a policy reform. And one person said, I got it. And they told the story of taxpayers. They said, taxpayers will be hurt if this policy reform doesn't pass because they will be on the hook for millions of dollars and they don't even know it yet. And so they went through this narrative of everything the taxpayer would come across, increasing potholes in the roads, those sorts of things. And they said, and the worst thing is year over year, it will get worse. And they also continued with about a 5-minute discussion about why exactly that was in the tax code and why we needed to pass the reform. And they said, that's why we need to change this law. And the room got silent. It had reached some of the folks in the room, as a matter of fact. Some of the folks thought it was a great story. And as they began to debate, should we tell the story of taxpayers? Should we tell the story of a single mom who can't quite figure out how to get her kids to daycare and to her job? What story should we tell? We asked them a simple question. Are you the target of this story, or is somebody else the target of the story? And the room grew silent again because the answer, it was no. Now, Lonnie, do you think when the client was telling the story of taxpayers that they were telling or selling?
In my opinion, they were telling.
And why do you think that?
Okay. Well, I heard you say that the story went on about 5 minutes about something. And at that point, I pretty much knew I was about to check out. 5 minutes is a long time for me to listen to something random of facts. I don't want to hear data or definitions. I like to hear about actions. Am I right?
You are exactly right. Even though they were trying to make an emotional link to the people they were talking to by telling a story and telling a story about taxpayers, they had missed something very important, and that was linking the policy reform to what's important to the people they were talking to. One of the things we like to do when we're working in workshops is get ourselves from talking about what a policy is into talking about what it means. And we like to use this example. It's a cell phone. So there are 3 ways to talk about this cell phone: what the cell phone is, what it does, and what it means. So this cell phone is a Gorilla Glass with a notice on it, and plastic, and it has a chipset in there. And it's also a phone and a calendar. It's a smartphone. What does it do? Well, it takes an audible tone and translates it into a digital tone and shoots that off to a tower, which magically gets it to another tower, takes the digital data, transfers it back into an audible tone, and I'm able to hear what people are saying. It's also how I handle my email, how I make sure my appointments are on time. If I'm out and about and need to look up something on Google, this is what I use for that. But what does this phone mean to me, Lonnie?
Oh, it means that I can hear people who are far away, or I can know whether I have a doctor's appointment.
And more importantly, it's how I stay connected to my family when I'm on the road, and I'm on the road a lot. So what it really means to me is keeping up with my loved ones. So when we're going through a work session, we're trying to talk about what things mean versus what it is that we're selling. And as we grappled into this or looked under the cover of selling, I went to Amazon and I just wanted to see how many books on selling are there. There were tons of books on selling. There were so many books on Amazon that it has its own category. And everybody's trying to put their specific take on selling. But when we really boiled, every book I've read, it boils down to one thing. Start with what it means to the person you're targeting. And then if you want to expand it out a little bit more, it goes into 3 core principles, and they are all you need to know. And the 3 core principles are ask, listen, and link. So asking is the first way to engage with your target audience. And if you're not able to ask them in person because you're targeting a large group with a policy reform, you can ask for a prototype to understand better what resonates with that audience. So, and that's really about knowing your target, listening to what they have to say, listening being the second one. So you ask the questions and then you listen to what they have to say. While you're listening, the hard part is not just thinking about what you're going to say next because you want to have a persuasive conversation. It's listening and learning what really matters to them. And then most importantly is to link what's important to them to what you want to achieve or what you want to sell them, whether it's an idea or a product. And that link or connection is the most important part of selling versus telling. So with those 3 principles in mind, Lonnie, why don't we look at a couple of examples for to just like websites and see if people are selling versus telling. What do you think?
Sounds good.
Okay, we'll go back to the web browser here. Let's start with one we've all seen. What do you think, Lonnie? Telling versus selling?
I think they're selling.
Why do
They're
you think that?
asking us to do something pretty active. They're asking us to vote for their party.
Yeah, I think they're selling. If you look down low, what do you see
Okay.
here?
Oh, look, I wouldn't expect some of those groups to be huge numbers of Republican voters.
Yep. So obviously they're trying to target beyond, they're trying to get away from the old man perspective as their only target, and they're showing you that women like them too, right there out of the top. They also have engaging graphics, so they are selling. I'm not sure if they're selling well. We'll find that out soon. And I'm not their target audience, so this isn't really what engages me. But some of us on this call might be their target audience, and you can decide if they're selling based on the principles that are important to you. Now, let's look at another example, the other side of the coin. Okay, Lonnie, what do you think, telling or selling?
Well, Hillary Clinton looks much happier here than she did on the Republican side, but that's probably a side point. The real thing that strikes me is upper left, together we win. What a strong message.
Yeah, that is a strong message. You know what really, I thought stronger together was really interesting as how that relates to the core that the Democratic Party is trying to sell, which is bringing people together to do something. Even, you know, we can debate whether they really do that or not, but that's what they're doing. Now look down here at the bottom of the site. They don't have demographics and groups.
No, they're asking me to do things.
So what they've done well is reach their target emotionally, and they've tried to make Hillary seem friendly, and then they have very clear ways for you to get involved, because together we're stronger. And so that's an interesting thing. So they've actually managed to link it from that top call to action to easy ways for you to get involved. Okay, let's look at another one. Selling or telling?
Oh, it's almost black and white, just a little bit of yellow, and there aren't any. Oh my gosh, it's all words and no photos. Who's the candidate? Doesn't show a picture.
Yeah, this is very interesting. The only way to know who the Libertarians candidate is the center section here, and it's the sign, not his face. So you look at what they're writing about, and it's all information. Now, their target, libertarians tend to do well with facts, but if the LP wants to reach beyond the people they already have, they might consider adding a layer of selling to this to get me emotionally involved. Now, let's go out of the political realm into the policy realm. I pulled up a paper earlier from the Cato Institute on organs. Now, Lonnie, look at that. What do you think? Are they selling or telling in their white paper?
Well, from the density of the text, I'd say they're telling.
But let's listen to the first sentence. On June 6, 1995, baseball legend Mickey Mantle was placed on the transplant waiting list after being diagnosed with end-stage liver disease caused by hepatitis, liver cancer, and years of alcohol abuse. Is that selling or telling?
Oh, that's a story that does draw me in emotionally.
So that's interesting. So now here's an example of a white paper, which feels like, okay, I'm a policy analyst. How do I sell what we're selling? Because at the end of the day, I'm paid to do research, right? And I need to get the facts out. And they start with the story. So that's, as a reader, I'm thinking, okay, I'm starting to care. I know who Mickey Mantle is. Okay, now let's go same topic, different organization, Institute for Justice. It's not exactly the same, but this is their initiative on making it legal for bone marrow donors to receive a stipend or some money to offset their costs while they're down after having donated some of their bone marrow. What do you think? Selling or telling?
That one is selling.
Interesting contrast. So where in Cato's paper is more big picture and they're talking about all organ donation, in the white paper. And if you go back here, it starts with a story, very quickly gets into charts and graphs. I'd love to see them bring some stories in a few more times here, but it is also their core purpose is to have credible data so that if another policy researcher in another state's writing about that topic, they can cite this back and it's credible. The Institute for Justice took on the same policy issue. They're coming at it from a very different angle than Cato because we all know what they do. And they thought, okay, there shouldn't be a law banning the sale of organs, but we're not going to win on that right now. What we're going to win on is an organ, your bone marrow, which regenerates itself, and there's no reason you shouldn't be able to give somebody a stipend. It's not like you're selling a kidney and you'll never get the kidney back. So that bone marrow topic is like that first tactical step. And then they found a family with 3 girls who all require bone marrow transplants or they will die. And they're all on a waiting list. And that mother is facing the loss of potentially all of her daughters if they don't make it up the waiting list. And part of the reason that people don't donate all the time, even if they're on the list, is it puts you out of work for a number of weeks. I think it's 6 weeks maybe 4 weeks when you donate bone marrow. Not everybody can afford to do that. And their point is if you could just give them a stipend for living expenses, more people would be able to donate. So that's the white paper versus fully packaged video. Now, I don't want anybody to think I'm saying Cato doesn't sell, by the way. I use them as an example because they are a white paper producing organization, but they do also sell. So, this was the extreme example of a white paper that's not produced into a brochure or anything, and they are pulling from that. If you look at some of the other work that Cato does, you do see them putting more of a face on some of their policies. Okay.
I think I get it. All this is well and good. What if I want to delve deeper into selling?
You mean, what do these 3 simple principles mean to all of us?
Yes.
Well, I think about when to tell and when to sell from a policy perspective a lot, because policy it feels like it's inherently just linked to telling people so that they can learn. But then I think about a lot of the clients we've worked with over the years, and the one that comes to mind was a group of people who worked on fiscal federalism with us. I couldn't even say fiscal federalism 10 times fast when we first started working with these people. And as we started thinking, okay, how can we make fiscal federalism, A, important to people who can pass legislation, B, important to people who support those legislators, and C, understandable, we realized that fiscal federalism as a policy, just even talking about federal grants coming in for schools, and then those have long-lasting requirements that make it so that you no longer have decisions over school lunches and how much money is coming in versus how much gets to the end student, and then how much it costs. Like, you can hear how that all turned into a big mess. And even with some of the top policy people in the country working on this issue, they knew so much about fiscal federalism in different ways that small changes could be made to make it better. But really, at the end of the day, they just wanted to change the whole thing out of the gate. And we came together in a room, and we realized something about fiscal federalism. We were all making it way too hard, and it is complex. But Lonnie's already falling asleep as I'm telling her this. I can see that. But if you talk to Lonnie about fiscal federalism, you lose her. And we were fortunate. We were actually having this work session in Utah where they have a small reform that's named Financial Ready. And they had passed it a year or two in advance of this meeting. And just hearing the term financial ready or financially ready, is that better than fiscal federalism, Lonnie?
It's action-based. I love action.
Yeah, so we thought, well, let's look at this reform, and instead of trying to change the whole thing right now, we know we want to change the whole thing. Let's focus in on this one policy and look at what value it brings to the people who are going to care most about it. And in this case, it was legislators. And well, let's tell a story about one person instead of many, like taxpayers. And we did try the taxpayer story in that. And what we realized is if you boil what Financial Ready does, it's imagine that you are a legislator. And a couple years ago, we were having trouble passing a national budget. So we realized that you would need to close things down that you thought you had prioritized as a legislator because the federal funds were cut off. We went into a shutdown. I think everybody remembers national parks were closed. All sorts of things happened that were manipulated at the federal level. But at the state level, you had things like, we take education dollars, and because we take education dollars, we as a state have agreed to put some additional resource into these priorities. Well, the federal funds cut off, but they were still required to support those priorities. And legislators were getting phone calls of people screaming at them over things they couldn't even control. And so, like, imagine you're talking to that legislator in the hallway after he's just had a very angry constituent mad at him because a core service had to be cut back while they were still paying for something that didn't really seem necessary to keeping the state going. And you say, okay, Representative Tom, what if you could be prepared for the next budget crisis that comes out of Washington? What if you could see the federal funds coming into your state and measure their impact? What if you could then plan for the future on behalf of your constituents? How would you feel? Lonnie, how would you feel if you're Representative Tim, Bill?
Thomasina, that'll do.
Thomasina, yeah.
I'd feel like maybe you were giving me a lifeline from a hopeless situation where I had to do stuff that couldn't be done to a possibility of actually serving my constituents.
And what would you ask me if I told you that?
How do I do it? It sounds great.
Well, I'm glad you asked, Representative Lonnie. I have some draft legislation called Financial Ready that will allow you to be prepared for the next budget crisis out of Washington, so you can see federal funds coming in and the strings attached, measure the impact on your state, and act on behalf of your constituents. So that's how a really complex telling about fiscal federalism situation was able to turn more into selling. And when we developed this package, it allowed a lot of policy people to then bring in some specific examples on the policy side because they got the attention. In fact, legislators actually read the bill after that, as opposed to, I just got this packet and it's one of 20 packets on my desk and what do I do with it? After that initial work session, the part we like to talk about is that the first bill we worked with a group on passed in only 59 days. We walked out, 59 days later it passed and then was signed into law by the governor. Actually, it was passed by executive order, and then the next time it was then codified by the legislature. But now, why would that work, even if we're analytical? Why do you think that would work? Well,
I'll bet it has something to do.
I'm not sure if anybody can hear Lonnie, but I suddenly can't hear her. So we'll just go into why that works. The way your brain works, if you've looked into neuromarketing practices, neuromarketing sounds very unapproachable. I actually found a book recently by a fellow named Roger Dooley, and it's called Brainfluence. This book, if you're like not really totally into selling, but want to get some understanding of the psychology behind it, this book is a really good example of how you can make something that's kind of cerebral, neuromarketing, and make it practical and understandable. What they found out, what they do is they take people and put them in a brain scanner and then watch their brain activity as they're analyzing problems. And one of the things they've noticed is that 95% of the brain activity that's happening when somebody makes a decision to buy something is subconscious. What does that mean to us? Subconscious. What that means to us is when we're starting with facts and figures and the logical side, which is the conscious side, we're only speaking to 5% of the brain. And so the question was asked, okay, so do you want to sell to 95% of the brain or 5% of the brain? But do you leave the facts behind? And Roger's answer is, it's not always bad to include factual details, as they will help the customer's factual brain justify the decision. Just don't expect them to make the sale. So, or as we like to say in our work sessions, people buy on emotion and they justify with facts. People buy on emotion and they justify with facts. Now, if you don't believe me, think about the last major purchase you made. Just think about it. What was the last major purchase you made? You got it?
Okay.
Was there any emotion involved in making the decision about your last major purchase? What was it, Lonnie?
Oh, I wanted a red washing machine, not a white one. The best rated. I wanted it because it was red.
Is that the one you bought?
No, I got facts involved, and I started thinking about repair bills later on.
Okay. Well, I can tell you my last emotional, like, big purchase was a car. And there was a lot of emotion involved in that. And the emotion was centered mostly around budget and economy. So I ended up with a tiny little blue car. It's like Smurf blue that gets almost 40 miles to the gallon. So remember that people buy on emotion and justify with facts. And that's the final L in all, which is linking or connecting emotionally after you've asked and learned or listened. So I want to play a little game. What if you're invited to give a policy briefing? Are you selling or telling? I made a little quiz. Let's just look at these, Lonnie, and see.
Okay.
Selling or telling? Because sometimes maybe you should tell and not sell. So Lonnie, in a donor meeting, are you going to sell or tell?
I know the answer to that one. I'm a fundraiser. I'm going to sell.
Why are you going to sell?
It doesn't matter if I can give the person 500 pages of fact. It matters, do they wish to invest in us? Do they like us down at the core? And do they think we do good stuff?
Okay, so that's a no-brainer. You're going to sell at a donor meeting. You're going to sell at a sales meeting. Okay, what about gathering signatures for a ballot initiative?
They usually have something catchy or a young person handing me a clipboard. I think that also is sell.
Yep. How do you keep the door from slamming in your face? You have to have some way to get their attention and get them interested. So you're selling. You're starting with an emotion before you bring them back into, and that's why I need your signature here so that Bobby Sue can still get his school lunch or whatever. Okay. Legislative testimony.
Oh, that's harder. But not really. The legislator wants facts. You tell.
I actually would disagree with you on this. We've done about, 40, we've trained about 40 policy people this year through presentation boot camps. And what we've found is that in a legislative testimony, it's a very formal, often a very formal presentation environment. But at the end of the day, the legislators are hearing multiple people talk about the same policy issue. And what you need to do to be heard above the rest is grab their emotions and then leave them with something memorable. So during the boot camps, we're always working on, okay, how do we start with a story? Or how do we make these numbers really stand out so that when they leave, they're more likely to think back to what you said, maybe look at your leave behind and integrate that into their research. It actually reminds me of one of my favorite ways that somebody just planted a seed in one of his presentations. It was a few years ago. We were working with a think tank in Louisiana on a voucher expansion issue. And he actually started with some numbers and some data, but he made them emotional. This is how he did it. He said, if you only remember 3 numbers out of this, or 3 things out of this presentation, I want you to remember the number 50, 50, and 1. And He said, he wrote it down, 50. Louisiana is 50 out of 50 in third grade reading. And he wrote reading. And he wrote 50. Louisiana is 50 out of 50 in college entrance. And he wrote that. And they said, but we are number one at one thing. Incarceration. So what we need to answer today is, do we want to educate or incarcerate? And that's why I'm here to talk to you about expanding vouchers in Louisiana. Now, what do you think people left that meeting remembering?
Put them in jail or teach them how to live.
Right. So he was able to relate his policy research, somebody else's policy research, to the three most important things and then link it to the emotion. Are we going to put these kids in prison later, or are we going to make a change for them now? So really, we should never be selling or telling at any time, in my opinion, especially when we have lots of research to impart. We should be selling, and a good way to do that is to find the most important pieces of your research and find ways to make them relatable and memorable. Now, somebody's probably going to ask me, okay, but when I'm in front of a bunch of policy people who are going to ask me hard questions and my credibility is on the line here, do I still sell? What do you think the answer is, Lonnie?
I think you still sell. I think you persuaded me in this last hour that I always have to get on the wavelength and do a lot of listening so I learn, and then link to the person, and that's selling.
Yeah, so if you are asked, I'm glad you agree with me. If you are asked to do a policy presentation, it is important to ask, and by this I don't mean like go into the audience that moment and ask, but ask in advance about what the people want to hear about, listen to the answer, and really learn what they care about, and then link it to what you're presenting. Now, an audience full of other people who are really into policy, what that means is they're going to be more interested in answering some of the bigger picture questions, and that's your opening to say, okay, this is what it means to you. I need to be able to really understand how the lack of voucher expansion in Louisiana is hurting kids, and I want to see examples from other states. So we're going to go through we're going to look at some of the data under the table, but package it in a way that's compelling and link it to stories. It doesn't hurt to seed stories, even in a policy presentation, so that people fall back on those examples when they leave the room. So all we need to do is what? Ask, listen, and link.
Yes.
Great. So I think we're at the 30-minute mark, Lonnie. How do we go into the Q&A section?
The Q&A section is a little icon at the bottom of your screen. If you will type your question in there, I will read it to everyone who's on this webinar. I have no open questions in Q&A, but there was one on the chat. Could you put it back there? My computer failed for a moment. You may have seen me do a reboot. You've got the question. Please read it.
Okay, so the question came in, what are the keys to include in a policy paper that is meant to be informative? How can it sell and not tell? Great question. Whoever asked that question, it doesn't tell me who you are, but that question is the core of why we're here today. The keys to include in a policy paper, you have to have credible data in a policy paper. And every policy paper, I think before you start writing the policy paper, it's important to have the discussion not only with your policy team, but with your communications team and your fundraising team about the policy research you're going to do and what's our long-term big picture goal. So let's take an example of education. If you are wanting to do a reform in education that increases choice, what problem are you solving? So we ask ourselves, what problem are we solving? Well, the problem you're solving is that children aren't getting the kind of education they need to be successful adults. And I know that's like big and fuzzy, but you can back it from there and then listen to the perspective of your communication staff. What do they think people will care about? Who do they think you need to target? Listen to the perspective of your donor contacts or your fundraising people. How are they going to sell this to get money in? And then go back to your paper and say, okay, I know we need to answer these questions from a policy standpoint. with the data. Now, how can I build in a narrative around that that brings somebody in to want to care about the data that we've come up with? So I would say the keys are: know your objective, know the perspectives of your communications and the donation staff, and then link that back into the paper so that not only other policy analysts and policy people interested, but it gives some ammunition to the other people who are running with that research so that they can sell the idea or help you sell the idea. And the one word of caution is too many stories in a policy paper. If your primary target is policy people, can clutter it up. So you want to find that happy balance between the two.
Thank you, Nicole. We do have another question from Bill in Cedar Rapids. Should my selling point always be positive, he asks. This would, for instance, this would make life better, or could it sometimes be negative? This will keep us from falling off a cliff.
One of the important things about selling versus telling is the emotional link. And the best way to get action is to make people understand what the pain or the trade-off is if they don't change perspective or buy your product. So I think more important than the positive outcome is knowing what the pain is they're going to feel. And this can be really hard because a policy solution is solving a problem. And we want to talk about, if we change it, this is going to be great, that's going to be great, this is going to be great. These are how those changes will make your life better. But before we can get that entrance into making them want their life to be better, focusing on the pain. You've just had a budget cut out of Washington. Your constituent was just yelling at you. You don't even have any idea how much federal money is coming in. But what you do know is that you're being forced to pay for things for which you do not have money because you are being held accountable to agreements, even though the federal government is not following through on their promise. That's pain. So what if you had the ability to be prepared for the next budget crisis and then it goes to see, measure, act, right? So we have that framework. It's very important that you have the pain and then the gain. And if you look at like Hollywood movie scripts, you'll see that I think it's 80 to 85% of the movie is usually about pain. It's centered on a struggle that the person's going on, or it's a conflict, and then once they resolve, it's very quickly just the happy part. And all of that emotion is what keeps us engaged. We're like, what happens next? Okay, what happens next? So that can work in policy as well. I want to know who's really being hurt right now and how painful it is for them so that I move to act. Do we have any other questions, Lonnie?
We do. In your experience, what policy area has been the most difficult to sell?
Ooh, that's a difficult question. We've done 45 work sessions on different policies. I think, honestly, the one, it's not that hard to sell, but it's hard to sell, has been public pension reform. So a lot of times I think early on, the target people wanted to talk to about making it so public pensions are no longer promising a set amount of money for the rest of your life, but rather give you a set amount of money in your account each year. So moving, and it's called direct benefit versus direct contribution. You're already bored, aren't you? That's why. Okay, so what we did figure out in the pension one was that we were often trying to target people like Lonnie with our message when the people we really needed to talk about and talk to were the recipients of the pension. You know what they're really afraid of? Going to the mailbox and there's no check. And this has already happened in Detroit and some other areas. And so we're able to tap in through telling the stories of people in cities that have gone bankrupt who don't get their money. We're able to transition from that to, and that's why we need to stop the bleeding now and change the pension system, at least for people coming in from having a promised amount for the rest of their lives versus just investing like a 401k. That one's been really hard. It's still it's still hard to get people excited about it. People get really excited about it the minute their cities can't pay for it anymore. But I think by telling more stories about what's happened in the cities and municipalities that have not been able to pay pensions, it is starting to open the door.
Let's hope that it does.
Yeah, no kidding. You're in California. California's a mess.
Cynthia from Austin, Texas asks, what if I just can't figure out my listener's desire?
Oh, that's a great question. When we talk about who we're targeting our sales at, I think the hardest part is to find the most strategic audience. So a lot of times we're like, okay, we're going to talk to legislators and this is what we're going to convince them of. And if you look at some of our longstanding policy battles, like school choice, we were targeting legislators and reaching them in the 90s with that message, but we forgot the one important thing for legislators. What's their key motivator? Getting reelected. So what we realized in that battle was we needed to move outside to the people who could provide ground, like air cover for them. We had to convince enough people that they weren't fearing being pulled out of office for them to vote the way they personally wanted to vote, but were afraid to vote. And that's how most policy battles are. So the first way to answer that question is, are you targeting the right person? Taxpayers are not a demographic, by the way. Taxpayers, when you tell me you're targeting taxpayers, you're telling me you're targeting the whole world. And so the first question is it going to be soccer moms between the age of 28 and 37 who live in a specific area? So finding that key demographic, and some organizations have gotten really savvy about this. Like I saw an application for a Trendsetter Award where they had figured out the 102,000 people in Colorado who needed to change, who they needed to reach to make this happen. And I thought, wow. And when you have that information, there are two ways to find out what really motivates them. One is get out and talk to them. Go out, go to a meeting, if it's a community meeting, if it's a church meeting, if it's a winemaking meeting, and talk to them and just ask lots of questions and listen to what they're telling you and ask more questions. You don't need to, in that one conversation, go to the third step, which is link them to the solution. Just ask, 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 ask. And occasionally I'll try a sentence when I do this. I'll try a sentence that moves towards the link and see, did that go well? But I'll do it very gently. I'm not going for a call to action there. I'm going for information. I do this on airplanes all the time with Obamacare, by the way. Then the other way you can do it is pay a market research firm to do it. If you know your demographic, they can help you understand what motivates them. I think the hardest part about this is, well, what do these things have in common? The thermostat and your teenage son. These are all things you wish you had control of, but you really don't. And sometimes you don't even understand what's happening, right? So the hardest part about learning or listening and really understanding what motivates people is, sadly, what motivates them is not what I wish would motivate them. So it's hard to accept it sometimes, but I think when we are able to make that link from what they're motivated by to how we can help them, or how we can bridge to them maybe caring about something beyond what they first walked into the room caring about, that it's good. It's hard, but it's good. And I think especially in the liberty arena, a lot of the time we're talking to somebody and realizing they don't care about anything I care about right now. Now what do I do?
Thank you. We're rounding off on the end of our time. Shall we take one more question? Or
I saw one pop up in chat and it says, when you don't have direct contact with your audience and are just developing your policy, how can you ask questions to sell? What if you don't have the funds to conduct market research? Well, you don't always have to have funds to conduct market research, first of all. If you can find the right questions to ask in a survey and offer an internship to a marketing student at your local college, then you just got free market research. It's not going to necessarily be as good as what a firm would do, but that is better than nothing. But more importantly, I think you need to you basically have to go have direct contact with some people, develop the questions that you want to find out about. So I'm trying to think of a policy under development right now that we're talking about. I would say federalism. Federalism is not very popular with a lot of people when they hear that word. And the word federalism makes us think that we want more federal government, not less federal government involved in our lives. So that's a great one. So we're trying to crack that whole nut of returning local decision-making power to local authorities. And as we go down the road of policy priorities, it's very helpful to find out where we can go with this. What I would say you do is find out what questions you want to ask. Like, in the arena of education, do we want more local control? In the arena of healthcare, do we want more local control? In the arena of fiscal federalism, do we want more local control? And go out into and this is where we just have to get out of our usual networks. Go to your choir and just start asking questions and listening to what people like. So I hear you're complaining about your experience signing up for Obamacare. Why do you think that's happening? Oh, what if the state had a system for you that was not attached to that healthcare.gov site? What do you think? How do you think that would go? You know, and just hear what they say. You'll hear a lot of different answers, especially in the choir, where a lot of them are Democrats. So it's just, you can do a lot just by asking questions of people who are not in the public policy world. Just find a way to use kitchen table language if you can. The word fiscal federalism should never come out of our mouths. Okay, I think that was the last question for the day. I want to thank everybody for coming to the Spark session. And I'll just give them a reminder, Lonnie. So we have the Ask the Expert session coming up on October 27th at noon. And based on the questions that come in between now and about October 10th, I'll figure out which one of our network of communications, marketing, and strategic planning people we should bring on. I try to bring on 2 to 3 experts, and then we go through a list of questions. We tried it last time live, and it seemed to go fairly well. So previously they were pre-recording their answers. So just shoot your questions to Nicole, NICOLE, @sparkfreedom.org. And I just want to thank everybody for coming. Thanks, Lonnie, too, for asking me lots of questions.
Thank you all. Goodbye for now.
Bye.